late to a meeting, so I always say that, but I'm going to try to keep this a little brief. Who wants to ask the first question?
Hey, good morning, Stephen. Your reaction to the Supreme Court's announcement today, siding with the Trump administration, removing 500,000 illegal aliens who had temporary protection status from Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti. What's the next step in this process, and will any of these folks be eligible to stay?
So just for everybody, the program that the gentleman's referring to is CHNV. Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. But more specifically, it's the program, this is a very important point because this context is often missing, it's the program that was launched by the Biden administration to fly illegal aliens into the country by aircraft. So when you hear about migrant flights, when you hear about illegal aliens being flown into other programs too, they had a flying program for hundreds of thousands of illegals at the border that was run out of DHS and funded by FEMA. Hundreds of thousands of illegals at the border that was run out of DHS and funded by FEMA. They had a separate program for UAC, unaccompanied alien children. But when you think about mostly when people are talking about the migrant flights, they're talking about this program, the fly-ins for these illegal aliens. About 500,000 illegal aliens from those 4 countries, particularly in the last 2 years of the Biden administration, were flown directly into American cities and towns. So, of course, we revoked those, they called it parole for those individuals, amnesty basically, and now, of course, they're all subject to deportation from the United States. And, of course, self-evidently, of course, they have to be deported. You can't have a situation where the Biden administration can fly in 500,000 illegal aliens in the last 24 months, and we're having a conversation about, oh, maybe they should get to stay for life. They've been here for 24 months. They were flown into our country illegally, and the good news is the airplanes travel in 2 directions. Next question.
Stephen, can you just comment on, so the president's post this morning on China, he didn't specifically say what they did wrong. What did China do wrong?
It's a great question and a very valid question. I'm going to let the USTR, the trade rep, Jamieson Greer, as well as Secretary of Commerce and Secretary Lutnick, provide more detail on that. I know that's not exactly the answer that you want, but I will speak at a high level to the fact that China has abrogated the agreement. The United States acted immediately and in good faith, as of course you all saw, with the proclamation adjusting the tariff rate. China did not fulfill the obligations that you all saw with the proclamation adjusting the tariff rate. China did not fulfill the obligations that it made and committed to with the United States. And so that opens up all manner of action for the United States to ensure future compliance. It remains the president's hope and desire that China will choose the path of cooperation, of common ground, and that we can open up China to American business, just in the same way that America, of course, as we all know, has been open to Chinese business for a very long time now. And so hopefully China will choose the path, to use a very common bureaucratic phrase, of rules-based conduct, not a phrase I often use, but it applies here, and follow the agreement that they reached. Next question.
How quickly must China respond? How quickly must China respond to the president's demands until that action is taken?
And again, as I mentioned, China often says that it believes in the exact phrase of the rules-based international order, right? We've all heard that phrase from China over and over again. This is the chance to show it's serious about upholding that commitment to the rules-based international order. And as soon as possible is the best answer I can give you. We want to see them comply with their agreements with the United States and fulfill their obligations so that we can have, again, a relationship that is cooperative and that is constructive, which is what the president wants.
Stephen, could you share more information about the person who was impersonating Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, the FBI?
Information that I apologize.
On the new visa restriction policy
Yes.
that will apply to foreign nationals that, according to the U.S. government, are censoring Americans through social media, for example. From your perspective, is this something that is happening in Latin America?
Well, there are examples, for example, in Brazil. Of fairly significant restrictions that have been imposed on the free speech rights of Americans, but
would you mention someone in specific?
But just as a general matter, this represents the United States' continued commitment to restoring free speech and fighting censorship. It was one of the big issues in the election, and we're going to fulfill and follow through on that commitment.
Can you talk about the China visa restrictions? Is this something the U.S. is planning
the State Department is putting that in place right now, so I don't want to get ahead of Secretary Rubio in how exactly that's going to be developed. So details to come. But as a general matter, the policy is going to be that we're not going to be awarding visas to individuals who have a risk of being engaged in any form of malign conduct in the United States, which of course would include espionage, theft of trade secrets, theft of technology, or other actions that would degrade the security of our industrial base. At the same time, there's a deeper issue here, too. J.D. Vance has spoken about it as well, about that we don't do enough in this country to reward and celebrate American genius. You know, we, in the 20th century, during a period of very low migration, led the modern world in everything: aviation, space flight, technology, national development, medicine, everything, using our own genius here in this country. And so, of course, we want to have an immigration policy that allows, just as we did during the World War II era, people have specialized knowledge to be able to contribute to our national economic security. What we can't do is have a system that deprives Americans of an opportunity to contribute to their own country. And we cannot have a policy in America where every citizen of this country, whether looking for a job, whether looking for housing, whether they're looking for a government benefit in a time of need, has to compete with all of planet Earth. Because then you're not a nation anymore. At that point, you're just a world economy.
Steve, are you considering
taking actions against other universities in addition to Harvard? What does that process look like? And have you been in touch with any of the other schools' leadership about what they need to do to avoid such repercussions?
Well, so obviously Harvard has been engaged in the most pernicious conduct of any of the universities. They defied a lawful subpoena from DHS. They're engaged in a pattern and practice of invidious race-based discrimination, illegal gender and sex-based discrimination. They failed to comply with the Supreme Court ruling in Students for Fair Admissions. And that's just the beginning of the examples of Harvard's perfidy and unlawful conduct. But the administration is, as you know, looking back to our very first executive orders, is going through a compliance process with all of America's institutions of higher learning and K through 12 to ensure rigorous compliance with our nation's civil rights laws, in particular Title VI and VII and Title IX. So that's protections against racial discrimination and protections against sex-based discrimination. And so if a university, for example, is discriminating against white men, or is discriminating against Asians, or is discriminating against Indians, or is discriminating against people for being straight, or is discriminating against, say, a girl or a woman in the K through 12 and a woman in the collegiate context for in sports or in access to private facilities, all of that conduct is unlawful, and all of it will have to be addressed with the appropriate remedy.
Did this White House have concern about drug use by Elon Musk?
The drugs that we're concerned about are the drugs pouring across the southern border. Next question.
Are the negotiations still going on?
Well, as you know, we received an almost immediate stay from the Federal Court of Appeals, and the tariffs are fully in effect. Also, all nations know that the president has vast authority in the trade space given to him by Congress. I mean, these are laws that you all know well, Section 301, Section 232. There are numerous statutes that give the president authority to conduct trade, because trade is a core element of national security and foreign policy. It's why the Congress has given the president those authorities. So nations all around the world understand that they are required to continue these negotiations with the United States in order to avoid tariffs. And they all understand that.
And could you talk about Elon Musk and his...
Oh, sorry, behind you, yes. There's a question behind you. Yep, sorry.
Just real quick, would you describe...
He went like a little bit first, like 5 seconds. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The RFK Jr. report had 7 citations citing academics that turned out to be fake. Did that live up to the standards of the U.S. government? And are there new procedures in place or any accountability for that?
No, I don't believe that's true, but even regardless, the reality is that what has been fake for generations now is the medical and nutrition advice that so much of this government has been giving our families. And, you know, we saw, of course, you know, during COVID with like fake rules about from the so-called experts about masking and social distancing and everything else, or pretending that there's the same risk profile for a healthy 4-year-old kid as an elderly and obese person. The Maha report is the most significant and important breakthrough moment in terms of prioritizing prevention, underlying health, answering and asking the right questions. Why are there such persistently high rates of pediatric cancer in this country? And why have they increased so significantly since 1970? Why are pediatric cancer rates so much higher in the developed world than the developing world? Why do you even have a concept called diseases of civilization? I think you've all heard that concept before, right? Where in the most developed countries, you have such high incidences of cancer, of immunological disorders, right? In other words, things like celiac disease, food allergies, eczema, psoriasis, gut disorders. You have so many quality of life disorders that can actually be crippling and debilitating, right? In other words, some of these disorders can completely degrade in the person's entire quality of life permanently with no known cures. They can treat these things with, like Crohn's disease, for example. They can treat these things with steroids. They can try to mitigate the symptoms, but there's no path out for millions of Americans. What is causing young babies in this country to have these crippling allergic reactions or immune systems that don't fire properly? They underreact to certain illnesses. They overreact to other illnesses. And we don't see these same things in the natural world, in other primates. And so the report, which took just such extraordinary courage, and I'm so grateful to Bobby, in talking about the chemical load in our society, the chemical load that a child accrues from the day they're born, in terms of everything that they touch and interact with in the world, the complete denuding of our food supply, in other words, the eradication of all living things, all natural things from our food supply in the form of these ultra-processed foods, so that children are living a life where they're not having access to anything natural, they're not having access to anything that's healthy. Everything they do have is loaded up with insane amounts of sugar. For years, I still think it's the case. If you went to like a store and you looked at baby food, it's filled with sugar. Why are people putting sugar into baby food? And how many children's snacks, right, are filled with dyes, artificial ingredients, and massive amounts of sugar? What is this doing to a young body from the day they're born? Combined again with all the chemical exposures, the incredibly accelerated growth and compression of the overall vaccine schedule from even when I was a kid. Parents have questions. They want to know, again, why do their kids have these chronic health conditions? Why do they go to the hospital when they're sick? Instead of just, in other words, they have like a common cold. Why is it sending them to the hospital? Why is their immune system firing wrong? Why is it that that foods that people have eaten for thousands of years are suddenly causing these crippling allergies in children? Why is it these high and persistent rates of obesity that is no precedent in history amongst our young people? What are the effects and the cost to our healthcare system over time when you have these high rates of chronic illnesses, heart disease, obesity, lung disease, asthma? Like, what are the effects of these on a society, both financially, personally, quality of life? Why is it that a person from the developing world has a lower cancer rate than an American does? I mean, on average, right? But within a single generation, their family has the exact same cancer rate, likelihood of getting cancer, as the American population. These are questions that no one has wanted to ask or explore or assess, and thank God that Bobby is doing so. I have time for one last question.
Has the president plan to call or meet with Chinese leadership? Does he have
No updates on that, so I'll take one more question.
Just a follow-up question. Does the administration already have an internal procedure on how to identify foreign nationals who are acting in that way regarding the visa restriction announced?
Yes, so I would just say that.
How to identify those individuals?
Yes, so the State Department, under the leadership of Secretary Rubio, is putting in place a system to ensure that anyone who enters this country, but particularly for longer-term immigration benefits, things that have a pathway to a green card or a pathway to citizenship, right, the holy grail of the U.S. immigration system, putting in place a protocol, both in terms of the interview process, the documentary process, the social media process, of making sure that anybody that is admitted to this country, and again, in particular for these longer-term benefits, is somebody that is going to be supportive of our values, of our way of life, that's going to assimilate, that's going to integrate into our national culture, that's going to be financially self-sufficient. Look, you should never have harmful migration, ever. There should never be a case where somebody's coming into this country who who has a negative view about America, about the West, about our civilization, isn't going to be able to pay their own way, is going to have a hostile attitude about the way we live in this country. Like, why would any society, why would any civilization that actually wants to preserve itself allow for any migration that is negative to the country as a whole? And so I applaud Secretary Rubio for taking the steps he needs to make sure that America delivers for Americans. Thank you.
Was the White House